In this video, you'll learn the basics of React Router v6. You'll learn how to create static, dynamic, and nested routes, and how to create layouts and links. In the next video, you'll learn how to load and submit data to an API while maintaining a responsive user interface. This is the exact app that we'll be building in the next two videos, and I'll be going over everything you need to know about React Router v6 to build highly dynamic and responsive apps. My name is Larry, and this is Digital Logic. I've got a new React project open, and the development server is up and running. Within the app component, I removed everything within the wrapping div. Within the index.css file, I've added a CSS reset, some styling for the HTML element and a tag, and set the default box sizing to border box. Before we can use the React Router, we need to install it. So open up a terminal and type npm install React Router DOM. Once the React Router has been installed, wrap the app component with a browser router component. React provides 4 different routers that you can use, but if you're building a web application, then you're probably going to want to use the browser router. This is the less capable browser router because it's missing a data router, so many of the APIs and React hooks will not work with it. I will show you how to add a data router and cover the advantages it provides in the next video. But for now, the basic browser router is good enough. Open up the app component, and then add a routes component, and make sure to include the import from React Router DOM. Before we can add new routes to the app, we need to create them. So create a new folder named routes, and then create a new component, which I'll name home. Create the component's function, and then return a new JSX object, which I'll wrap in a div, and then add an h2 element with the text home. Finally, export the component. Duplicate the home component, and I'll rename the duplicate products. Rename the function to products, and change the text within the h2 element to products as well. Do this 2 more times to create a content component and an about component. Now that we have 4 separate routes set up, open up the app component, and within the routes component, add a route component. Set the path property to the root, and set the element property to the home component. Save the file and refresh the browser, and you'll notice that the home component is displayed in the app. Within the component section of the developer tools, notice all the additional components that the React Router provides to the app. Now let's go ahead and add the other routes to the app. All of these paths are relative to the root path. With all the routes added to the app, we can easily navigate to any route by modifying the URL in the browser. But this is a bit much to ask any user to do, so let's add some navigation links. Add a nav element to the app, and we could use an anchor tag for the navigation, but this would trigger a full refresh of the browser, and that's not what I want. So instead of an anchor tag, use a link component. This will still render out as an anchor tag to the DOM, but it won't trigger a full refresh, and instead we'll rely on React Router to perform the navigation. Set the path with the to property, and then define the link text. Create a second link to the home path, and then test out the results in the browser. You can also use a navlink component. The difference with the navlink component is that it adds an active class to the currently selected link. So let's check out the rendered HTML for the about link. Notice it has an empty class property assigned to it until I click on the about link, and now it has an active class. Add some styling to the navigation elements to make them a little easier to read. I am using Sass modules for this project, but feel free to use any styling solution that you prefer. Then I'll use the global keyword to select the global active class, and then set the text color to hot pink. And while we're at it, update the other two links to use the nav link component. And then add a link to the contact page. If you want to change the class name that is assigned to a link when it is active, define the class name property and pass in a function into it. Destructure the first parameter and retrieve the isActive property. In this case, I'll use the ternary expression to determine if the link is active, and then return the name of the class I want assigned to it if it's active, or nothing. So functionally, this link is the same as the others, we just used a bit more code to get there. You can also define dynamic segments within a path. So let's create a new route and set the path equal to products/:id. We'll need to create a new component to assign to this route, so duplicate the products component and rename it as product. Rename the function to product, and then update the h2 tag. Back in the app component, add the product component to the route. And then modify the URL to include an ID property after the product segment. To retrieve the dynamic segment within the product component, create a new constant, params, and set it equal to useParams. And then print out this value in the component's JSX. You can define multiple dynamic segments within a single path. So as an example, remove the ID property and replace it with a type. And then add a second property, version. When I save the project, you'll notice that the product component is no longer displayed in the browser. This is because the route's path no longer matches the current URL. So modify the URL to include a version property. And the product component is visible once again. Update the product component to display the type and version properties from the URL. We can also define a catch-all route if no other route matches. We'll also need a component to display when this path matches, so I'll duplicate the product component and rename it to error route. Update the component's function name. Remove the paragraph tag and get rid of the useParameters hook. And then update the h2 tag to display something more helpful. Add this new component to the new route. And then remove the two dynamic segments from the product route and replace it with a single segment, which I'll call slug. Save the file, and since the current URL doesn't match any route, we end up in the error route. Now we will only see this route if no other routes match the current path. But what if the user entered an invalid value on a dynamic route, like the product route? The way the app is currently built, it would depend on the product route to handle the error. But we'll look into this in more detail in the next video and explore our options. We can also define nested routes by making one route a child of another. The child route inherits the parent's path, so remove the product segment from the dynamic route. In the browser, add a random string to the URL to fulfill the dynamic segment. And notice that the products component is still being displayed, and the product component is absent. The reason this is happening is because the React Router expects the product component to be displayed within the products component. So open up the products component, and right under the h2 element, add the outlet component. Make sure to include the import from React Router DOM. Notice in the browser, we now have the product component displayed inside of the products component. To make it easier to get to the product route, add a new navlink component and set its path to products/green widget. Within the product component, modify the output so it displays the slug property from the params object. React Router also supports defining layouts that can be shared with multiple routes. To define a layout, let's create a new folder named Components, and then create a new component named Product Layout. Add the product layout function, and then return a new JSX object. Wrap the component in a div, and then add an H2 element with the text product layout. And then add the outlet component. And then finally export the component. Back in the app component, remove the products component from the products route and replace it with the products layout component. Now add a new child to this route and set the index property to true and the element to the products component. Save the file and check out the results. With the products route selected, the products component is displayed within the product layout component. Click on the green widget link and the product component is displayed within the product layout component. So any nested route within the products route will inherit the same layout. But what if we wanted to share a layout between unrelated paths? So we'll start out by duplicating the product layout component and name it shared layout. Update the text in the H2 element to say shared layout. And then rename the function to shared layout as well. Back in the app component, define a new route above the about route. And this time we're not going to define the path property and instead just set the element property to the shared layout component. Make sure that the shared layout component wraps around both the about and contact routes. And now when you click on the about link, the shared layout is visible, and the same is true for the contact link. If you want to learn how to submit data, fetch data, and use many of the new hooks available with React Router v6, then check out this video next.